Hi, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. I am Tori Brame. I am meeting again with the lovely Anna Crigger. Today, we are going to talk about divorce and its effect on both our physical health and our mental health. Anna and I grew up in a very conservative religion. We did not grow up in the same sect of the religion, but there were a lot of similarities. We met in college in a very conservative college, and we lost touch after that, and then ended up both going through a divorce at the same time and reconnecting afterwards, which was super cool to find out that we had taken a lot of similar steps over the years. Anna has an amazing podcast. Anna, do you want to talk a little bit about your podcast?
Sure. So I have a podcast on Instagram. If you look up my handle, it's going to be under Anna Criggs. And I just talk about growing up in a cult and kind of the basics of what a cult will look like, and then my experiences in my homeschool cult.
And it is one of those that I like every time she comes out with an episode. It doesn't matter if I'm driving or at work or anything, like I will start listening to it right away. Let's get started. So first of all, Anna and I both got married at a pretty young age. I was a little bit older than her when I got married, and there was a lot of it was a very conventional marriage. It was very kind of what we were supposed to do. Both of us ended up getting divorces. We were both the instigators in the divorce. Instigators? Fire starters? I don't know what you want to call it.
Yeah.
We were the ones that realized that it wasn't a functioning marriage before our ex-husbands realized it. So with that, there comes a lot of uncertainty, shame, stuff like that we had to muddle through before coming to the conclusion that that was the best decision. So I just have a bunch of questions for you to talk about that. The first one is, when did you first realize that your relationship was not a healthy relationship?
I think it was pretty late. I kind of had instances that I felt like something was wrong, but I was never given a vocabulary to ever describe what was going on. But I think the biggest instance was when I was starting to get really depressed, and I realized that my marriage was turning into a close family member's marriage. So it was my marriage was basically mirroring that. And I realized that their relationship was extremely unhealthy, and that's where my marriage was headed. And they didn't believe in divorce, and so they were still stuck in that marriage forever. And I just didn't believe that I wanted to be in a marriage like that forever.
And that's scary to see it play out and then realize that you're on the same path towards that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would say the first time I got the realization was after my son was born. It was my ex-husband came alive for the first time. And it was like he showed so much love towards my son that I had never felt personally from him.
Oh,
and so it was like a whole battle with that of well, maybe you're just a really good dad, but not this way with me.
Yeah.
And it really helped that I had my therapist there to kind of walk me through those, because she was with me every step of the way. It was at first she was just well, just letting him off the hook left and right, helping me let him off the hook and stuff like that. But then as we progressed down, digging deeper into what our relationship actually was, it was a lot harder for her to defend my marriage as something as functional. It was probably early 2018 was when I realized that we probably weren't going to make it. And then late 2019 was when we finally went through the divorce.
Okay. So when I realized it was in early 2017, but I was still fighting that notion that, divorce was coming because of just all the religious things in the background. And so I didn't have a therapist at the time. And everyone else around me was telling me that, I just needed to deal with it. And I don't know if you know this, but there was a mom's group that you became a part of later on.
I
And
did.
yes, and that mom's group was the group that started, like, I would read other women's issues within their marriages that they were having and
Mhm.
how the kids were being treated and stuff. And that was where I started realizing, like, oh, this is kind of what's going on with me.
This is abuse. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there were books that were recommended in that group that I went to the library to go get so that I could read it through and see what was going on in my own marriage. So that was like, before I even got into therapy, that was some of the stuff that helped.
Hmm. Yeah, I was low key stalking you on that group, not gonna lie.
Oh, I was
I,
thinking too.
I, yeah, I think you like posted something one time and it looked like it was a very vulnerable post, just asking questions about your marriage. You hadn't said anything about like thinking about ending it or anything like that, but just asking questions. And I was like, holy crap, I know her from college. Like
Mhm.
I haven't kept up with this girl in forever. And
Yeah.
so it was interesting because your questions on there, I was going through the same thing in my marriage.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was like, I was reading all these things. The thing that bothered me about the moms group, and this, like, I feel like we all have our shit that we can handle,
Hmm.
and it's different shit for everybody else. So, like if some people, it's like a deal breaker if your husband's a night owl, and you
Right.
guys don't go to bed at the same time, like that's a deal breaker. Other
Mhm.
people, they can handle a certain amount of sass or sarcasm or something. And, it's like we all have something that we can handle.
Mhm.
And the thing that bothered me the most was like letting your husband off the hook for being really inconsiderate or really rude to you. And there was some of that in the moms group of people being like, oh yeah, my husband does that and it's no big deal. And I'm like, yes, it is. It's a big deal. Like,
Yeah. And that was very, like, it was confusing because some people would be commenting and be like, it's fine. And I'd be like, it is? Because I don't think it's fine. That's really
no,
weird.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe for them it is. Like that's the thing. If you look at marriage over the years, it has meant so many different things at different
Mhm.
times. It used to be like just like two families like signing a truce, just like, hey, let's just like get a marriage going and then we can't fight anymore.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and then it's like evolved into so many different things. And so I think now it's important to know, like, some people do get married for the security. If they just want to raise their kids and they want a husband to bring home the paycheck and that is their goal, there is nothing wrong with that. But like it wasn't my goal. Like I wanted like a good relationship. I wanted a best friend and I wanted like love, like real love.
Mhm.
And so I wasn't always as open-minded to you know, believe that other people might just want the security, and there was nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got way off topic. So if you guys
Sorry.
if you guys want to check out her Instagram, I'm gonna put it in the description below. But we actually did a podcast yesterday talking about divorce, and it was about purity culture and just the struggles you go through with being married. Like we talked a lot about being married within like the purity culture and what that means, and then also divorce and what that looks like. So jump over and check it out if you want to hear more of our conversation, because that one, it was really good. Like we took some rabbit trails that I think were really helpful.
Yeah.
My next question is, how did being in a relationship like this affect your health? Could be both mental or physical.
Um, so yeah, there was a lot of both. It affected my mental health very negatively. Um, so I've always had anxiety and depression, but I just didn't know that I had it. I think I've had anxiety since a child, and the earliest time I can remember depression would be in high school, that high school age. But in college, I was very outgoing and talkative, and I had a lot of friends and, I was a social butterfly basically.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, I loved you.
Yeah. And then once I was in the marriage, I think it was like the first, it's so upsetting because some of this does not even have to do with my ex-husband. It was just the fact that I went from nothing to then all of a sudden I'm living with this person 24/7 and having sex for the first time ever in my life, so I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression. And I actually had thoughts of divorce months after I was married, but it terrified me. And I was like asking for forgiveness from God. Like I just felt really bad about that. And I don't know that there was even a reason. It was just like, this is overwhelming to me and I don't know how to handle this. And so it would ebb and flow, but it got really bad to the point that I did not want to go out and socialize with people. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just wanted to stay home all day. I didn't like large crowds. I basically had like a mini panic attack if I was in large crowds. And I kind of shut off the world basically. As I was going through the divorce, I had a lot of physical problems. So I started developing allergies and my stomach hurt all the time, intestinal issues, stuff like that. Again, I think that was the anxiety. I did change my diet during that time. And once the divorce was over, a lot of those symptoms went away. I did develop like a intolerance to dairy during my marriage as well. I developed a peanut allergy, and these things might or might not be related, but it is interesting that it happened once I was married. And I never had any of those issues in college that I can remember. So it was just like all these intense like physical problems. And then the mental side, I just took a nosedive.
For sure. So you mentioned like having those first thoughts, like a few months after you got married, you were having sex for the first time. There was still a lot of shame around sex, even though it had the label of marriage. Did you experience that too?
Oh yeah.
So it's like even in the safety of marriage, there was still so much conflict.
Yes.
Yeah.
And mostly it was like I had intense nightmares that I was having sex outside of marriage and that I was sinning, and like I would be so confused because I would never do that. So yeah, I felt so much guilt and shame for having sex, even though like I knew cognitively I was married and it was okay. But because my brain had shut down even romantic thoughts for years and years and years, that going from nothing to suddenly having sex all the time, it was very difficult.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's wild. And, for me, my had lived with my husband, with my ex-husband before we got married for several years. And so we had been engaged for a while, but, so we had sex outside of wedlock for a few years. And so I kind of gotten past that like mental barrier. But when I went to get pregnant with my kid, I went through, and we were legally married when we started trying for a baby. And I went through more of that, like, oh my goodness, I'm pregnant, I'm in trouble. Like, yeah. And it was interesting because it was like, I had felt some safety in like, yeah, we're not married, but I'm not going to get pregnant. And then it was like, even after we were married, there was so much shame surrounding that, even though it was, a decision we had made together. We were, we had been together for like 6 years at that time. We were legally married. And, it was like, there had never been a more planned baby. Yeah. But I still went through that of just like, oh, what if I got pregnant? It was so scary.
Yeah. Well, that actually like triggered a memory. And so I'm going to be talking about something very sensitive. But I do feel like it's important because a lot of women don't talk about this. So with the upbringing that I had, it was really emphasized that you have to have sex no matter what, how you're feeling, you need to be able to perform for your husband. And so I did that several times, but I didn't know this at the time. When you don't want to have sex and you go through with having sex, your body reacts like you're being raped. And so I learned to disassociate while I was having sex. And that really affected being able to have sex. My body would shut down, and it was extremely painful. Again, this situation was not my ex-husband's fault.
No.
But I just didn't understand about consent yet. I was 22 and I did not know about consent.
Yeah.
Within the marriage, it was like, oh, there is no consent, right? It's like you own each other's body, basically. And I mean, there are other times that I would be turned down when I would want to have sex, but I wouldn't. Yeah. So it was just like this. That was the other part of this question of like, what were some of the physical symptoms? Well, some of the physical symptoms were that I physically could not have sex after a while. And this was years into the marriage. And it was something that
painful.
Yeah, it was so painful. Like I would be crying, and he was very kind and was, like, you need to tell me if it's painful. And it's like, we will never have sex if that's the case, Yeah, and I also had a ton of UTIs during that time as well, which is very odd because later on with my boyfriend, none of those issues.
Yeah, it was like your body was like sending you so many signals of like, this isn't okay. We're going to do everything we can to make sure you know that this isn't okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
And, nobody ever talked about those things. And so I had no clue that that's what my body was trying to tell me.
Yeah, definitely. Wow. Yeah, for me, I had a lot of lupus symptoms. I had juvenile lupus, so I had them, when I was a kid, teenager, all that. But it wasn't until I gave up my job and I just started going to school for full time and we combined finances, that my health really started going downhill. And so much of it was just anxiety about my relationship. And, if I felt like I couldn't get out. We had several fights, and anyone who's in a long-term relationship knows that you have a fight and you're just like, all right, it's over. But like we had several fights where I felt like the right thing to do was to leave, and I didn't feel like I could. And there was this one time that it was just an incident where I saw clear as day that I could not continue. But like my car wasn't even in my name. Like I didn't have anything. I didn't have a bank account. I didn't have, the password to our joint bank account. Like I didn't have anything. And I wrote it in my diary. I still have the diary where I was like, I can't do this. Like, I literally can't do this. I have to get out. And it was before we were married, before kids or anything. I slept on it. And it was like 5 days later, the feeling kind of faded. And then I was just right back to it. And, when it got to the point where I had to get out, like I thought about that time a lot, where I was like, it would have been so much easier, back then, like pre-kids, pre-lupus diagnosis, all that. But I think, and, you mentioned like, through no fault of your ex-husband, like I had consented to giving up the bank account. I hadn't asked him to give me the password ever. Like I was, what's that movie? Eat, Pray, Love. Have you seen that?
I haven't.
Okay. Well, in the first scene, she's talking about like needing to get out of her marriage. And she said, I've been a willing participant every step of the way. And that was how I felt. It was like, isn't this what I wanted? But it's like, no, it's what I thought I should have.
Right.
like it's what I thought I needed to do. And so I just like compromised myself over and over and over
Mm-hmm.
again.
Mm-hmm.
And, for the sake of not making a fuss, not being inconvenienced by a breakup, like all that stuff, like my body told on me. It was just like, you can't just continually shut off parts of yourself and expect your body to keep functioning in a way that it
Yep.
should.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kind of like going off of that, getting divorced has a bunch of strings attached, especially for women, especially in the culture that we grew up in. What were some of those fears that you faced in knowing that you needed to go through a divorce? Like, what were some of those things that came up for you?
So there were a lot of hangups about what I needed to, in the process of getting divorced. I think the biggest thing was just losing my community. The community I was a part of while I was married was very hipster traditional. They like to aspire that they were different and that they were accepting and stuff like that, but they were not accepting. They were very they presented themselves as a little more mainstream than what they were.
They were the
So
ones that had like food and Bible studies.
yes, exactly.
I went to
Yeah.
a few of those. Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Okay. Yeah, and they're great people. I mean, I knew that they didn't believe in divorce. As a matter of fact, the first counseling that I went to was pastoral counseling because that's what my ex-husband was comfortable with. And so the pastor was definitely like, well, you can get divorced, but biblically you cannot get divorced. And I was at the point of being suicidal at that point. That was a death sentence for me. So I knew that I was going to lose that community. I was very afraid that my ex-husband would put me through church discipline to try to keep me within the marriage, which he didn't. He was
For those people who don't understand that term, can you elaborate on that? I know what that is, but
yeah. So church discipline is a pseudo-biblical concept of basically you're telling on someone to the
it's
church
basically like public shaming.
Yes.
Within the community.
Exactly. So you first, the elders will get together with you and talk to you. And then if you don't change your mind, they'll bring in more people. If you don't change your mind, they do bring you before the church and basically are like, we are not going to associate with this person. And most of the time, the person had already left the church. So what they do is that they talk about you behind your back and they tell the church body, like, don't talk to this person, depending on how severe the sin was. Or if you do talk to this person, you need to try to lovingly bring them back into the fold or whatever. And so, because they believed that divorce was not something biblical, I was very afraid that I would be put under church discipline. My ex-husband never did that. He never even threatened to do that, but it was a big fear in my mind. And I was really afraid of, honestly, I didn't think I could take care of myself. I had
when you're taught for so many years that you can't,
yes,
tend to believe it.
Right. Well, and yeah, exactly. And like we talked on the podcast, I didn't have an education that allowed for a career. So I worked part-time, various jobs while we were married. I will say one of my issues, and one of the issues with my upbringing, is that it does tend to make the woman dependent. So they can't take care of themselves. They believe that the husband needs to be the one working and the woman needs to stay within the home. So I was fighting those beliefs, but I was still like, well, my ex-husband should be the one providing for us. I shouldn't need to be going out and work. So that was like a huge undercurrent of me, like being super annoyed that I had to work. And I kept jumping around to different jobs. So I was like, I don't know that I'm even going to be able to take care of myself. And if I'm going to be able to live on my own. I had never paid bills. I had never had, I was starting to build my credit. So I had one of those basic credit cards that, barely lets you have any credit limit. Just like all of these things that I was like, I don't think I can do that. And then I was afraid of disappointing my family,
Mm.
of hurting my ex-husband, because divorce is it was deeply ingrained that it is like a scarlet letter on
Mm-hmm.
you,
Yeah.
and that you failed, and that, you'll never be able to find someone else. Because like some people actually believe that if they are divorced, they cannot remarry.
Yeah,
That
they're married for life. Yep.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then that plays into a lot of times the ex will try to get back the spouse that divorced them, even
Did you
after
experience that?
yeah. I was experiencing it while we were in the process of getting the divorce. And a little bit afterwards, it seemed like he was still trying to cultivate a relationship with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it was romantic or not. I didn't want to talk about it, but you just have a feeling.
Yeah.
And that was my feeling that I was getting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is so, again, like I tend to make excuses for my ex-husband a lot. Like, I don't think that's a fault of his own, because that is what we were taught.
Mm-hmm.
That was what he was taught. And
Yeah.
so he's just doing the right thing by his religious beliefs. But that is so unhealthy and so dangerous, because
Mm-hmm.
the psychopaths, the ones that are really extremely physically dangerous, will
Mm-hmm.
chase around their ex and try to get them back. And it's like, no. When
Yeah.
the other person says no, you need to respect that and try to move on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that was, a huge fear. And then my parents' disappointment, that was something I was like really not looking forward to.
Yeah.
And just knowing that anybody who knew me within college, my past, my childhood, anybody who lived in Tennessee would know that I was divorced and would look at me as possibly as a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And I obviously knew in my heart why I needed to get the divorce, but trying to explain that, because I am a people pleaser. And so I want people to be
That
like,
like.
yeah, the worst. Because I can't please everybody. And, that's something that I've learned along the way, like just not a thing. Yeah. So those were the main things that were just like really like on my mind at all times, of like, I'm just letting everyone down. Yeah.
For sure. And one thing that you mentioned that I just kind of want to double down on is that you keep saying, we make a lot of excuses for our ex-husbands and, through no fault of his own and stuff like that. And it's like, that was one of the things that kept me in the marriage for so long, was that I knew he was doing the best that he could with what he was given.
Exactly.
And and I still believe that. Like, I don't believe that he was this, terrible monster or anything. I just believe that what he was capable of giving me did not align with my needs in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some things that I went through that I would not wish on anyone, but I still believe he was doing the best he could. It was like where he was at that moment in his life, he was doing the best he could. So like that just really resonates with me, where it's just like, he like, even the sex thing, like he was very understanding about it, and he like didn't want to hurt you or anything like that. But, it was the way you guys were married and the culture you came from and everything like that. It was like, there's not much you can do there. Like, you can't really help it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you, this is going to be kind of a tangent. Did you ever blame yourself for a lot of things?
Oh, I blame myself for everything, which didn't help because he did too. He blamed
Oh,
me for a lot of
really?
things. Oh, yeah. So, it was kind of like my upbringing as a female Christian was that, and we had mentioned this yesterday in the podcast too, just how there was a lot of manipulation and stuff encouraged when it came to men. It's like make them think that it's their idea and stuff like that. which now I use with my kids. So, whatever. um, and, just a lot of stuff like that. And it was like, if he goes out and cheats, it's probably because you didn't put out enough. And, if he doesn't want to be around you, it's probably because you're not taking care of yourself enough, or you're not being nice enough. That old thing where it's like a girl isn't smiling and the guy turns around and tells her to smile. It's just like, and it's that kind of a thing where it's like, if he is being an asshole, it's probably your fault in some kind of roundabout way. And so I think I blamed myself so much that he was also used to blaming me. Okay. And it was like, if I let him off the hook by blaming myself, he would be like, what? I get to be off the hook? Awesome. Let's go for that. That's it. Mm-hmm. And so there was, again, through no fault of his own. Mm-hmm. And growing up in the family I did, with our culture, how we did it, everything was my fault. And, I do have brothers who everything is their fault. So it wasn't just being a female. It was, just like taking on responsibility for a lot more than we're actually responsible for. Yeah. And so I would blame myself for a lot of stuff. And then he would blame me for a lot of stuff. And it just, I mentioned in the podcast yesterday, I did go through my own suicidal stuff there, where it was like, I'm ruining his life and mine, and he would remind me of that. And so it was just, it was like, why be around? Mm-hmm. And I really am thankful for my therapist who pointed that out to me, where mm-hmm. she's just like, love is coming up next to somebody, and if they're not doing well, it's lifting them up. Right. And, it's like, it's not just like staring at them down in the pit and being like, yeah, you deserve to be there, Mm-hmm. And so it was like, it was really good that I had her, because I couldn't, just talking about the moms group, like how they would normalize so many toxic traits. Yeah. There were a lot of people that I had that, their husbands may have very good intentions, but those are toxic traits, and they were normalizing for me, which even reinforced the idea that everything was my fault.
Oh my gosh, that is exactly. Was your ex religious or previously religious? Okay,
no,
not religious.
He wasn't. No, not religious at all. But he was a male.
Right.
Right. Yeah. He was allowed to do a lot of things that women weren't allowed to do, and so I feel like that was really reinforced in his upbringing.
Okay. I'm going to go off on another tangent. I'm so sorry.
Are you kidding me?
Okay. One of the interesting things that I've learned very recently, because I was so angry at my ex-husband for I call it abusive power, having that, power and using it. And the reason that I was so angry was that I felt like I had no ability to say no. After a while, I learned that I either had to have the most amazing argument for a reason why we needed to do something, or I just needed to fall in line. And, but I've been learning recently that, if you are within religion, and then, the culture at large is very patriarchal. Mm-hmm. If you are taught from day one that God has given you the power to lead, and that you are the head of, your future wife, and that women are the weaker vessel, and, just like looking at women in that way, like, how are you not going to be abusive, even if it's in little things? Mm-hmm. If that is what you were taught by the church leaders, and that's what you were raised with, and then you go to a church that also propagates those beliefs, how are you supposed to differentiate between what is abuse and what is God's will and what you believe to be God's will? Mm-hmm. You can't.
And so women the entire time are enablers of that, both mothers and wives.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just like, it's a setup for failure. Mm-hmm. And I just have so much more compassion, even though, what I went through was very painful, and I don't want anyone else to have to go through that. That is something that is in our culture. It's so ingrained.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me really sad for those men who grew up in that culture. It's difficult to like pull your mind from those teachings, right? Like you have
Mm-hmm.
to recognize, like, first of all, that that is an abusive teaching. And then secondly, that you are a part of that, and then changing your mind from day one,
Mm-hmm.
because the teachings I grew up with, I didn't have those teachings until age 7.
Mm.
And then, I got out of those teachings in my 20s.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's just, that was just something that has changed my thinking with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, it's very true. And it's like, how scary must that be for them to have that belief challenged by
Yep.
someone they're supposed to lead?
Yep.
It's like, because even then, it just kind of goes back to like, oh my God, am I a shitty leader?
Right.
Because this person is revolting against me. It's like this person that I'm in charge of suddenly is saying that I'm a bad leader. Oh, and I'm not allowed to lead anymore, which is what I've been taught. So it
Yeah.
really does like take a really open mind
Yeah.
and a humble mind to come
Mhm.
at it and be like, wow, maybe everything that I've been taught, like maybe I am doing it wrong.
Mhm.
And or like maybe not necessarily wrong, but I could be doing it better and I
Yeah.
should be doing it differently and I should be taking this into consideration.
Yeah. And I think it was also looked at as a challenge to their manhood, to his manhood. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a man. Who am I if I'm not in this position?
That emasculation is, I was watching a TED talk one time and she was talking about how fragile the masculinity of a man must be if he can ever be emasculated.
Yep.
Like, and then, just comparing it to a feminine nature, like, I don't ever feel like my femininity is taken away from me. Like, there is literally nothing that a guy can say that'll make me feel like I'm not a real woman anymore. Like,
Look, that's still me.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, just like having that fragile identity as a masculine man of like, if I don't have this woman following me, then I'm not a man anymore.
Yeah.
Even that is heartbreaking.
Yeah, I know. Oh, yeah. Mm.
So, all you guys out there, you're off the hook, but do better,
Yeah. Right.
So, how are you able to overcome those fears? Like those fears of, I can't provide for myself. I can't do all this. For me, and we did touch on this a little bit yesterday in our other podcast, was like, for me, I was physically disabled.
Mhm.
And I just had this like unwavering belief that it would all work out or I would die in the process, but like it didn't really matter because I wasn't going to be here anymore.
Mm.
And I did have a lot of people come up under me, like a lot of family members. And, I worried about being ostracized by my family members too. My mom had always, prayed very openly that none of her kids would get divorced.
Mm.
And so I was hyper aware that I was her first kid to get divorced. And I I didn't want that, and I didn't want them to hate me or be really disappointed in me or be a point of shame for them. And I wasn't, I'm still not like super close with my parents. Like we don't talk every day or, tell each other all of our dish or anything like that. But it was still, they're still your parents and you want to be a good kid. And like even them, I feel like I was really lucky where I felt like they saw me and they were just like, you're allowed to come home if you need to. And, my brother offered to have me move in with him for a while, me and my son. And I just had a lot of people being like, if you need anything, let us know. And it was like as soon as I decided that those fears weren't valid, is when everybody was just like helping me. And it was like, but it took that for me to like decide that they
Yeah.
weren't like valid. So like how are you able to overcome those fears of like not being able to provide for yourself and all that?
I think it was a combination of so many things. I am a huge planner. So I started sketching out what I needed to do in order to leave. And
this was before he knew.
this is, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I had started talking about, like, I think, divorce might be on the table. But I would go back and forth and be like, okay, no, I'm not going to get a divorce. But yeah, I can't remember when I started planning. But one of the books that I had been reading, basically gave an outline of like what you need to do in order to,
what was it?
Actually, I'm using it to boost my computer. It's Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men. It's by Lundy Bancroft. And it was the book that was recommended. It's for women in really abusive relationships. But the book goes through different kinds of abusive men, different kinds of controlling men and how they operate, and things that they have to do in order to actually change. And then in the back of the book, it has like, emergency, like if you need to leave, this is how these are the contacts you can contact. But one of the basic things is that you basically pull out your finances and get your own bank account, try to get a full-time job if you can. And then, take photos of all the documents that you're going to need. And then try to find a place to live. So I was having those like thoughts of like, okay, I need to do these things. I got on medication and that really helped calm my mind, because at the worst, I was having like basically ruminating thoughts, like thinking the same thing over and over and over again. And my mind was just really loud. There was just like, I couldn't focus on anything.
It's like that fog.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I basically had to walk away from my beliefs in a lot of ways, of just shutting that out of my mind, of being like, I know that you're saying that biblically, I can't do this, but this is what I need to do. So making a plan, thinking through for myself, like what was going on, and that I needed to get away from it. And then I had great friends, that I was able to go to a different church, and they were just like very supportive. I needed people who would accept me regardless of, whether I was going to get a divorce or not. And then once I was separated, it was just all of a sudden, it was just like, okay, we had a discussion on something and he couldn't handle it. And I was like, couldn't handle it in the sense that I wanted to go to a different denomination. This is what made me move out. I wanted to go to a different denomination that was a little bit more liberal, a little bit more accepting. And the denomination, I just want to go to Presbyterian church, if I remember correctly. And that he was like, I don't think I can do that. Religiously, they're different, and it was upsetting to him that, I wanted to change that. And I was like, I can't do it. I'm starting to get suicidal thoughts again. So I had to leave. And then while I was separated, I do not recommend this to people, but while I was separated, I found a lovely guy, and I dated him. I had lots of hangups about it, and the poor guy saw me at all of my emotional states, but I would talk to him about stuff that, beliefs, and he was just so supportive and just there for me, and would just be like, yeah, that's ridiculous. This particular thing, that was ridiculous. And so, that was just, he was just such like an angel in my life. And
so why do you not recommend it? He sounds wonderful.
I know. So I don't recommend it only because in my religious upbringing, separation, you're still married. So technically,
okay. No, I'm same page. Yeah. I get
it. Yeah. And so that played with my mind a whole ton. And honestly, it does make things more complicated. And so that's why I don't recommend it. Everybody who has gotten a divorce does not recommend it. At least the people that I know. So it's just one more added thing. And I felt so guilty. So I did break up with him at one point, so that I could decide whether or not I was going to get a divorce, because that was a decision that I was making regardless of who I was with. So that I wasn't using my boyfriend as like,
I'm with him now, so I can get away from you.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I get that a
I was
lot.
able to make that decision. And I was, I mean, we were still friends during that time, but I was like, okay, I can function on my own. I can pay my bills. I put together furniture by myself, for my apartment. Like I did all of these things by myself. And I was like, okay, I can survive.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I was happy. That was the other thing. It was like, I
Yeah.
just felt this freedom and happiness. So yeah, made the decision and then I got back together with my boyfriend. So
Yeah, when you said I put furniture together by myself,
mhm.
I had the same fears. Like my ex-husband moved out. I still had active lupus.
Mhm.
I still had stage 5 kidney disease. Like it wasn't all, rainbows and sunshine. And I had very severe joint pain. And I actually still have damage from that time, joint damage from that time. And I will for the rest of my life. Like it was really bad. And so one of the things was the tendons in my hand would get really inflamed and I couldn't grab things. And or my hands would be like stuck like that for days, sometimes weeks. And we had a 2-year period where I could never hold his hand because my hand couldn't like move in a way that could hold his hand. And so I like that's what I was dealing with. And now I had a baby and I needed to get a job and I was still a full-time stay-at-home mom and my ex-husband moved out and like, all this stuff was crazy. And it was an olive jar and I couldn't open it.
Mm.
And I actually like the contraption that I created to like open this pickle jar was, I mean, something from Dr. Seuss, but I opened it. And that was
Mhm.
the moment I knew I could make it. I was
Wow.
like, if I can open this olive jar, like
Mhm.
I can make it. I can do anything. And so it's like just that little thing, and I think he was like 15 minutes away. I know I could call him and he would come back. It was just like all that stuff. But it was just like this like brute determination where I'm like, I have to do this to prove that I can do anything. And so it's an olive jar.
Oh, that's awesome.
So what were some of the ways that your life improved after the divorce? Like, what did that look like for you?
I mean, my mental health just soared. Yeah, 2019 was such a lovely year of just feeling free and
Mm.
exploring my beliefs without being afraid of offending my ex and not necessarily offending or like just scaring him, and um, just not going to church because I didn't go to church. There was a period of time I didn't go to church for a while. I ended up listening to a lot of different resources. So I listened to an atheist, and he has a YouTube channel. He used to be fundamentalist, as a matter of fact, like
Really?
Baptist, yeah, like Baptist, and then turned atheist. And just listening to different perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
especially with him, it was interesting, like hearing, yeah, this is what I used to do to people to try to proselytize them and
Mm.
being like, ew, and just being able to explore that without fear of being like, ooh, I'm gonna turn away from my religion,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
and just being around people and doing things that I didn't feel guilty. I didn't have to feel guilty about. I changed my wardrobe completely. I started wearing a bunch of different clothes that I really liked. I started cussing, which is hilarious. For those of you who are not religious, the Christian community considers cussing to be like sinful, wrong, bad,
Mm-hmm.
vulgar, whatever you want to consider it.
Yeah.
And I came to the conclusion, because what I've heard is that originally cussing was a part of the common people's vernacular. And it
Uh-huh.
was the wealthy people that looked down on that as like, not as educated.
Right.
And so somehow it morphed into religiousness and how that was bad. And so I consider cussing to be something that is more of an emphasis, like
Yeah.
fucking mad about something,
Right.
that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah. And so, yeah, that was like a huge thing. My boyfriend at the time, would laugh at me because I would stutter before I would cuss because it was just not a part of my vernacular. Like,
So funny. You're like, oh, damn.
yeah, exactly.
Waiting
Like,
for the lightning bolt. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. He thought that was the funniest thing. Yeah. So, yeah, those were just some of the huge improvements. And then, after the
I had
divorce,
never heard that story before about like the history of swearing. That's so interesting.
yeah, and I can't remember if it's true or not. I don't remember where I heard it from.
Who
So,
cares? Yeah.
yeah, that's just how I interpret it. So, yeah.
That's awesome. What were we gonna say? I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Those were just some of the improvements. And then my health improved drastically.
Absolutely. And I went into remission. Like it was like once I had a plan, once I had that freedom, and you mentioned not wanting to piss off your ex-husband and like a lot of the ways that you were not being free, like free to be yourself. And I had so many of those. And it is kind of heartbreaking looking back at them, because it's like when you love somebody, you love all of them, all their little quirks, all the things that are kind of annoying, but it's like when they're away from you, you want even those annoying bits back. And it was like there was so much about me that annoyed my ex-husband. And so when he would come home from work, I would go around the house and like basically take away any evidence that I had been there. And, I would put away little things that I was working on because I knew he wouldn't like it for one reason or another. And I would turn off all the music I was listening to because he didn't like it. And there was a large gap of time where I did not sing. And anybody who came in my house, I would tell them not to sing because he couldn't stand it. And just like a lot of stuff like that, where it's just now it's so sad looking at that, because that is me. I have a terrible voice and I love singing,
Yeah.
and it's like anybody else can suck it. It's just like I'm not going to be that girl that sings opera in the grocery store. But if I'm alone in my own house and you happen to be in here, you're singing in the shower. Like it's
exactly
something that's going to happen. And but it was like he couldn't stand it. And my mom, she went to school for voice, and she has a beautiful voice, and she's sang for weddings, funerals, churches, all this stuff. And it was like fingernails on a chalkboard to him. And so like she would come in the house and I would get so nervous, and I would be like, Mom, you can't sing in here. And I made it sound like it was me that didn't. And it was like all this stuff I was being so careful about, and like telling everybody that it was me, like my nephew, he couldn't bring guns in the house, and guns are like his favorite thing. And I'm just like, we just don't agree with that here. And, it was like, it was a we thing. And, I've gone back and forth over the years towards like, who was I protecting? Was I protecting him, or was I protecting myself, that I was enabling him to control everybody around him? And, and it's like, if I had been like, no, fuck you, I'm going to sing.
Yeah.
Would he have stayed? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
And, when I just started being myself again and like doing all the things that I liked, it was, he hated it. And he would like make comments like, oh, I guess this is just the new you. And, just like all this stuff. And it's like, no, this has been me since I've been 16 years old. I've been hiding it because I was so afraid that you were going to leave.
Yep.
And now that you're gone, it's like, I can come back out now. I can be myself again.
Yeah. That is exactly how I felt too.
Yeah.
Oh, I kind of want to circle back to when I was separated, actually. It's so interesting, the mental turmoil. Now looking back, I'm like, girl, just cut it off. But I could not get it together. And so sometimes I would go back to him and, like just hang out, talk to him, whatever, and the comfort of that. And then go to my boyfriend's and be with him. And then I was just like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do here. I'm trying to work it out with him. And then I'd be
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm not going to work it out with him whatsoever. Like, I'm getting a divorce for sure. But I just didn't have the courage to do that. And I think, I have had so much guilt over that because it was almost like I was leading on my ex-husband, because I was still technically married to him. And then also going back to my boyfriend. And I just want to tell anybody who's out there, like, that is so understandable. And having that self-compassion and learning how to understand, like, that was who you were at that point. And you had only a certain amount of information or whatever, and now you're away from it. Understanding that is, it happens sometimes.
Mhm.
And yeah, I have talked to my therapist so much about that because it's like, why didn't I just cut it off? And she was like, you only had what you could work with at the time, and emotionally you were not there yet.
Mhm.
So I don't know if you ever struggled with that, but that was just something I went through for sure.
Yeah, no, that was huge for me. And, especially in like 2018, when I knew that we were over,
Mhm.
but I just didn't know when we were going to be over.
Mhm.
It was like I knew I wouldn't have another kid with him, but I didn't know how it was going to all play out. I didn't know if we were going to wait till my kid was 5 or if we were, going to get divorced right away, or like how it was
Mhm.
all going to look. And, we had a lot of breakup sex during that time where it was like, I was like, no, I'm leaving. And he'd be like, oh, stay. And then we'd have this really like passionate sex. And
Mhm.
then, I would like, it would get better for like 4 or 5 days. And I would just like be like, okay, maybe there's something to save here. Maybe this is good. And then he would just say something like, you know, crippling.
Mhm.
And I would just be like, okay, nope, I can't. And so, I would start standing up for myself again. And I would, stop taking any criticism that he was saying or anything like that. And then rinse and repeat. Like the whole thing would happen all over again, where it was this like, desperation for each other. But like looking back, it wasn't him that I was so eager to salvage. It was the part of me that he enabled, the
Mhm.
part of me that was the sick girl and the one that needed to be taken care of, and like the mom. And it was like there was so much of the victim in me that he allowed me to be. And it was like I didn't like it when he made me the victim, but for so many years I had wanted to be taken care of. And
Mhm.
so it was like there was this fine line where it's like I don't want to be a victim anymore, but you still need to take care of me.
Mhm.
And so it was that part of me that I was trying to protect. And it was like, there were so many times where have you heard of that John Gottman study where that he can tell, with like a 96% accuracy or something like that, just from facial expressions, like how they react to each other. Have you heard of that one?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And like contempt is the one thing that is like you can't recover from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would find myself thinking of that study so often. And I would be like, well, it's not contempt. Like I don't feel contempt. So maybe there's like still like, some kind of like
Mhm.
saving of us. I just remember there were like several months where it was dawning on me. It's just like it is contempt. Like
Yeah.
like we can't survive this, because when he says that kind of thing to me, I feel less than human. When I like compromise myself so often, there's only so many times you can do it without like starting to believe it yourself.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Well, and now this is making me think, like, in the end, I think I had a lot of contempt
Mm.
of like, this is ridiculous. And,
Mhm.
saying things because I'm not going to excuse it, just saying things that were like, "Ugh," I was very frustrated and angry and
Mhm.
depressed and everything. And like, talking about, I think we talked about this yesterday, but basically coming to terms with like, I can't change him. And that was something that I really struggled with. I wanted to just change him.
And that is so hard because it's like, you've sunk so much time into this person, so much time and so much effort. And how can they not be the person you always wanted them to be? Like, you were changing too, and I was too, and you were coming into like a more full version of yourself. And there's this old saying, a woman marries a man because she expects him to change, and he doesn't. A man marries a woman thinking she will never change, and she does. And, that like always really resonated with me because women are more fluid to begin with. Like, we have different hormones than men. We have different moods, and we're constantly evolving and learning new things. And it's something really beautiful, but you need to have a man that understands that and doesn't expect you to be like a man where you can be like, hey, this is my blueprint. This is my guidebook, have fun running me. Like, we don't work like that. And so like, you need someone that understands like the feminine fluidity to really like appreciate that about you. I digress.
Well, it's so funny because I was thinking I learned so much whenever we like, I never thought of it like that.
Yeah, we get deep. Like, we seriously get deep with this stuff. It's really fun.
Yeah, it is.
My last two questions, like, I'm just going to kind of combine because they're kind of the same thing, but it's like, what has been your biggest takeaway from this experience? Which, you ask anybody, nobody is going to be like, my divorce was great, like it is something hard. And, getting married is also something hard. Like, any big change like that is like, does take a lot of adjustment, and it takes some grief. What advice would you give somebody going through this? And like, what was like the biggest treasure you found on the other side?
I think, my advice for somebody going through this is try to find a good support system. I didn't really touch on this, but I had a support system in Texas, but not a really good support system. I basically went through it by myself. I had long distance support, and then the few friends that I had at my job and through the church that I went to. But if you can find people who have gone through divorce and they're on the other side, that is so helpful. I would really recommend trying to do some kind of counseling program for divorcees. And you may not want to do it right away. The program I went through, most of the people who were going through it were, I think, in their 40s to 60s. They had gotten their kids through school, and they were like, I've never really processed my divorce. I was so focused on my kids. I think that's super important. And then I think the biggest treasure that I found through this whole process is being open to change, being open to new ideas. It's weird because it was like I had two different parts of me. One was more open. I would ask questions, but the other part of me was very judgmental. I was very judgmental of people who got divorced because I was taught that divorce was wrong. And so I didn't understand the nuances that, you can't see what goes on behind the doors of people who are married. You just never know. And so being supportive of someone who's going through a divorce, and suspending that judgment, no matter what you think should or should not be done, that person should be supported no matter what. And I think that goes for pretty much anything, deconstruction of your faith, changing a career. It doesn't matter what it is in your friend's life. I feel that you should try to support them as best as possible through those situations.
And really like digging deep into yourself. Like, why don't I want to support them? Is it because they have to fulfill X, Y, and Z to be my friend? Is it because if they're getting out of a shitty marriage, but I'm still in my shitty marriage, does it challenge my beliefs that this is the best thing for me? Like that was a huge one, for a lot of friends of mine that have like been through divorces is, I was mostly out of the the Christianity part of my life when I went through my divorce. And so I didn't experience this as much, but it was like, you know, like that moms group thing where it's like, well, my husband does that all the time and it's fine. And it's like, if it's a deal breaker for this person, but it's not a deal breaker for 5 of your other friends, that challenges what you're putting up with. You know, it's like, wait, if they don't have to put up with it, do I not either?
Yeah.
That's a really scary thought, you know, for people who enjoy the security of marriage.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing you said that I want to touch on is like you finding friends that have been through it. Have you noticed that like since you're divorced, you're getting people coming out of the woodwork asking you like how you did it?
Not so much. I think you are the one person that I've found. Yeah.
Okay. I've had several people, and not all of them have divorced, you know, but like a lot of people just asking me like, you know, how did you get the courage to like stand up for yourself and say, you know, like this is not okay.
Yes. Okay. I have had a few people do that. Yeah, for sure. And then a lot of people, well, I have baby face. So a lot of people get shocked that I was ever married. They're like, how old are you? And then a lot of people will ask me questions of just like the whole process and everything. And like most of them are not in bad marriages or anything. They're just very curious to know like what happened and how I got through it. So yeah.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing for me, like advice that I would give people is like, I think the biggest thing that kept me in for so long was like the criteria of a good marriage. And it was like, is it good on paper? And even though it felt bad, I was like, he provides for me. He doesn't beat me, you know, but it's like, that is what a good warden does. You know, that's like what a good boss does. So my biggest advice would be like, if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel right. And you're allowed to have it not feel right, even if it looks right on paper and it might feel right to everybody else around you. Just like listen to yourself and know who you are.
Exactly. Yep.
And I think the biggest gem to come out of it for me was just like not apologizing for myself anymore. Like that, you know, once I was out, I was able to start this YouTube channel. And I was able to make a fool of myself. And it was like, I constantly felt like I had to like check back in and be like, you know, is this okay? Like, is it all right if I said that? And so like, I feel like the biggest gem for me was just like becoming unapologetic. And, you know, if I say the wrong thing, like, I'm not going to change my story just in case I might hurt somebody.
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense. That's awesome too, that you're able to do that.
Yeah.
I still have like, I censor myself quite a bit still, because I don't want to hurt others. But what I've had to come to terms with is that my story is my story. And it does involve other people. And I do try to be as respectful as I can. But what I noticed when I was going through my divorce is that there weren't very many YouTube videos discussing these things. Instagram, you know, I didn't really find any information as well because people are so private. And I totally understand and respect that people don't want to talk about this publicly, but our community is so hush hush about this kind of thing. There's no resources at all, it feels like. So I felt like eventually, you know, it's super important that I talk about this.
And it's way too common to not have any resources on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I don't know what the exact statistic is this year, but I think in 2020, it was like 56% of marriages end in divorce. And it's like, if that's happening so often, are we just saying that all the kids from those marriages are going to go to jail later? Like, are we just saying that all those people are, you know, sinning and wrong and, you know, miserable for the rest of their lives? Like, that is way too much of the population for that to be the end of the story. Like there has to be more to it.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your openness and just like how you've navigated all this. And it's like it's so good to see you like thriving and, you know, just like coming to terms with your experience and also sharing it for other people, because like it's like we were saying, it's way too common to be ashamed of.
Yeah. Thank you for being so open as well. I was so happy when you said you wanted to talk about it
Yeah,
because yeah, I don't want to like talk about it by myself. So it's been
yeah.
so awesome that you're also willing to talk about it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely. And I will put Anna's information in the description so that you can reach her on Instagram. Her stuff is awesome. So check her out. And if you guys have any questions or anything like that, just drop them in the comments. We'll check back periodically and yeah, make sure we're keeping in touch. See you guys later.
Bye.